Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2017 Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research. My name is Johan Eklund. I'm a Managing Director of Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum and Professor of Economics. And I'd like to welcome you all here, and particularly I would like to welcome this year's recipient of the Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research, Hernando de Soto, from Peru, Lima. I would like to give a brief background to the prize and why we award the Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research. It was founded in 1996, and it's today awarded for the 22nd time, and it's been awarded to over 27 years. Scholars have been awarded for their work and contributions to our understanding of entrepreneurship. The prize was founded by Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum, and the co-founder is the Research Institute of Industrial Economics. And today it's supported by Vinnova, Swedish Innovation Agency, and by a generous donation from Stockholm Köpmans Club, Stockholm Merchants Club, I believe it's translated. And the prize consists of the Hand of God, a bronze statue by Carl Milles, and 100,000 euros. And to my understanding, it's the largest prize of its kind awarded to entrepreneurship research globally. The Hand of God was created by sculptor Carl Milles in honor of C.E. Johansson, an innovator and entrepreneur who revolutionized precision measuring. Over the years, over these 27 years, a wide range of topics and disciplines have been awarded and considered for the prize. And students of economics are all familiar to names such as Israel Kirzner, William Baumol, Sidney Winter, and Philippe Aguillon, who have previous years received the prize. And today, the prize is awarded to Hernando de Soto. Prizes worthy, this prize needs to be original, and it needs to be influential. And one can think of many ways in which a contribution is influential. Most notably, perhaps through its impact on subsequent research, by furthering entrepreneurship as a field, or by furthering entrepreneurship education, training at an academic level, or by influencing policy making and society in a more broad sense. Over the long time and over long time spans, the award-winning contributions should ideally reflect the extraordinary width of entrepreneurship as a social science field. It can span, or should span, the entire spectrum from anthropology to theoretical microeconomics, and of course capture all of its methodological diversity. And previous winners include management scholars as well as geographers and economists. It is imperative to ascertain that the high-quality selection process of the winners, and we put significant effort to reassuring and continuity and robustness of this selection process. The candidates are selected, or the winner is selected based on a thorough evaluation by renowned scholars in the field, and it's not a process that takes 1 year, but it takes several years from the first nomination until we actually make an award. And there is a award or prize committee, which you'll hear more about later, perhaps. And as I said, there is a list of shortlisted candidates, and there's selection process is strictly confidential, or the discussions prior to the decision to award the prize winner is strictly confidential. But we always publish a scientific article after the prize has been announced, describing the contributions of the prize winner. So much for the background of the prize. Now I would like to say a few words about this year's prize winner, Hernando de Soto. In the summer of 1983, a group of researchers led by Hernando de Soto set out to get the permits necessary to start a garment business in the outskirts of Lima, Peru. The purpose was to investigate how long time it would take to get the necessary permits to start a business. The astonishing answer was it took 289 days to get all the necessary permits. This meant that ordinary Peruvians were deprived of economic possibilities, and the conditions towards entrepreneurship was hostile. As a consequence of this deprivation of economic possibilities, Peruvians were looking for other development paths. One path was put forward or suggested or promoted by a terror organization called the Shining Path. The Shining Path was a Maoist movement, and it's sometimes been referred to as the Latin American version of Cambodian Khmer Rouge. Hernando de Soto, sometimes referred to as the intellectual nemesis of the Shining Path, offered another path for development, one that allowed entrepreneurship to prosper. Close to a decade after the group of researchers set out to measuring the time it took to start a business, in 1992, summer of 1992, massive explosion shook the institute Liberty and Democracy led by de Soto. It was a terror attack by the Shining Path. This was a violent act which costed many or several innocent lives were lost. Nevertheless, this was taken as a sign that, as a positive sign. And I quote a colleague of de Soto, I believe, who said that, "What more proof do we need that we have a Shining Path on the run?" Since then, the Shining Path has been defeated, and the influence by de Soto has been growing, or continued growth, and has much further reaching impact than simply Peru. The research by de Soto has been the foundational work of some of the work done by the World Bank and the Doing Business indicators. That today is a project that covers 190 countries, measures the time it takes to start a business, and has had some tremendous policy impact across the globe. And not only developing countries can learn, or emerging economies can learn from this work, but also countries such as Sweden can learn from this work, I believe. With those opening remarks, I look forward to hear more about this work of Hernando in a while when he gives his prize lecture. And now I would like to welcome Tove Livendal, political editor-in-chief at Svenska Dagbladet, who will guide us through the remainder of the day. So, welcome up, Tove.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I remember when first reading The Mystery of Capital and how that opened, really many new thoughts and perspectives that I didn't have before. And in my current position, I was very happy 2 years ago to have Mr. de Soto as an op-ed writer at an editorial page explaining the mystery of Thomas Piketty. That's another story. So now we are going to ask Sweden's Minister of Finance, Magdalena Andersson, to join us on the stage for the awards ceremony. Please welcome her with a warm applause.
So, as the Swedish Minister of Finance, I'm very honored to be able to be here and this important occasion, awarding entrepreneurship research, very important area of research. And of course, I'm most honored to present the motivation for Mr. Hernando de Soto. So here is the motivation. The 2017 Global Award for Entrepreneurship goes to Hernando de Soto, President of the Institute of Liberty and Democracy in Lima, Peru. He has been a leading intellectual engaged in academic and public policy discussions on global development for the last 30 years. He has made substantial contributions to our understanding of the informal economy, as well as the importance of property rights to unleash entrepreneurship and alleviate poverty and underdevelopment. His contributions have led to a new and better understanding of the role institutions play in entrepreneurship, especially in developing nations. De Soto's work has influenced policy worldwide, both in terms of conceptual understanding and practical policy measures. His work presents path-breaking analysis of the role the informal economy plays in poor countries, and it also paved new ways to measure how difficult it is for people to enter the formal sectors. He bases his empirical work on painstakingly gathered, previously unknown data, allowing him to challenge several conventional beliefs regarding poor countries. In particular, De Soto showed that the main problem in many developing countries is not capital, but lack of property rights. He argues that poorly defined private property rights prevent people in developing countries from making productive use of assets they control but may not formally own. De Soto's analysis led to new ways to alleviate poverty and underdevelopment by reforming property rights systems, business legislation, and regulations. His analysis still have tremendous influence on policy throughout the world, both on governments in different countries and on international organizations such as the World Bank.
So, please, Mr. De Soto.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you very kindly. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, thank you.
So now to the main reason why we're here today. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Hernando de Soto to give his talk, Entrepreneurship and the Knowledge Needed to Make Complex Combinations. Welcome, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be in Sweden, and I'm, of course, extremely honored to get this prize. I know what it means, just as of recently, and I prepared two things at your request, Johan, thank you very much. And of course, Madam Minister, I'm so honored that you will have given me the prize and having the possibility of talking to you later, openly. I drew up a series of slides. And you will excuse me if I do not follow the order, but I've had a few conversations today that have changed the order in which I'm thinking of. That's because I'm so far away from your world that though I remember that my first years in life were in Europe, my father used to be the chief of staff of a socialist president of Peru, and we got exiled, and so I lived all my childhood and nearly all my youth in Europe, and I ran, after a while, Switzerland's largest consulting engineering company. And so what I wanted to do was sort of tune in as a Latin American mind, which I am now, trying to recall my European past where connections are maybe necessary. When I came to Peru, it was simply because my parents, always missing Peru, thought that there was nothing like my returning there, though I left when I was only 3 months old in the arms of my mother. And one of the first things I did, since I ran an engineering and finance company, was get into mining. Peru's very big into mining. And we went to the to Madre de Dios area, which is in the jungle of Peru, and started looking for gold just before it collapsed. And so we set up a dredge, and I was in charge of basically getting investors inside the company. And the investors said, we want to see what you've got as territory. And we had about 60,000 hectares of concessions. And we went down a glider, one of the biggest tributaries of the Amazon called the Waipetue. And as we were going down about 30 kilometers an hour, my German investors looked at different places and said, what are those? And I asked my general manager what they were. And he said, those are chichiqueros. I said, what's a chichiquero? He said, it's an informal miner who's washing gold, putting it together, and finding his way out through Bolivia or someplace else. But you know, these washing plants kept on going one after another and after another. And I said, aren't we supposed to own this? And he said, yes. Well, why don't we throw them out? And he said, because they're 2,000 and we're only 50. Now, that was a huge, widening experience. Then I started checking out Peru, and I went to see some of my distant cousins who had shops in my hometown, Arequipa, in the south of Peru. And they were full of street vendors in front. And I asked the same question. They're spoiling business. Why don't you kick them out? I said, because there's 300 of them, and there's 2 of us. And this kept on going. And then when it came to buses, I started finding out that there were about 10,000 official drivers of buses and trucks in Peru, but there were 290,000 of the other. Now I said, this is really interesting. This is something absolutely new. So I told myself, we have here a knowledge problem. How do you get knowledge of something that isn't apparent, that you can't grasp with your hands, and that obviously is a different society? And if you go back to the definition of a civilization is basically when something that looks like a culture gets organized, writes up, and orders itself. So I began, if you want to, an intellectual career while holding the different things I was doing. And I'll be going back and forth between slides because they do help, but they're not necessarily in the order that I wanted to show you. First of all, I started saying, where's the titles? That's the first thing that came to my mind. By the way, by that time, we had organized ourselves in such a way that we started being called by other countries. And if you haven't read about it, it's because I have literally worked for 30 heads of state. And with these 30 heads of state, one of the problems is that once you get inside, if you want to work with another head of state, you can't publish. No kissing and telling. But let me tell you what I have learned from our programs, which are literally all over the world. But anonymously to a degree, because you cannot steal the thunder of a head of state when he does a reform, in spite of the fact that they may limit it. So here we have bulls in Tanzania, and the property title is in the backside of the bull. It clearly says who owns it. And when I went to Egypt, and I was called in by one of the presidents of Egypt, and after 2 years, when we decided we're going to work outside, I went to see, I had a conference, and there was a head of the registrar's office. And he said, Mr. De Soto is giving too much influence to property titles. It's a right-wing word, or it's right-wing 2 words. And that's not the way we think about it. Besides, You know, it's nice to have Peruvians around and all of that, but you must remember that we Egyptians, 3,000 years ago, invented property when the Nile flooded over, and we had to find out how you measure areas of ground so as to be able to re-award them to those who had lost them to the flood. And I said, well, you know, I'm not into land. I'm into property, which is how people control things. And it's a lot bigger than just measuring land. Anyhow, he recommended, at that time I can talk about it because he's published it, to President Mubarak. You know, don't hire these Peruvians. Makes a lot of sense. Went out, toured the City of the Dead, and then I started seeing wherever we went that there were blackboards on top of the buildings. And I got out of the car and went to look at the blackboard with a translator, and all these Egyptians came out to surround me. And they said, let's have a picture taken together. Very third world, we had a picture taken together. And then went to the blackboard and said, what's that? They said, it's our title. It's an indication to everybody that they shouldn't be around because this belongs to us as established by so-and-so and so-and-so. So the property titles were on top of the buildings. I got the contract the next day because all over Egypt, there are property titles on top of the buildings. So he saw the land, but he didn't see the power behind the title. Then you go to Peru, and you go to Haiti, where we've been, and wherever you go, you see the official map, and they who are inside the perimeter of an area have already divided up the land, which is what you see there. And it all goes away all the way to Afghanistan. Then you get called into Peru, where we have continual conflicts between what we call the blue people. You may have seen the film about Avatar. The Amazon starts in Peru. So there we have a Peruvian Indian, so not to be sued by the people who do the film, geared up. And here you have a mining concession by oil companies. It's not about people that have a mining concession having the legal property and the Avatar people having their different traditions. They do have their different traditions. But those yellow squares that you see are their titles. They've drawn up their titles. And they don't believe in the white titles, they believe in the yellow titles. Then we started going to different other countries, and we started seeing the titles that are handed out wherever they go by the Islamic State, by Al-Qaeda, by the Taliban, by the FARC in Colombia, and the Shining Path in Peru. The first thing terrorists do, learning, of course, from the old Macedonians, is when you take over a territory, you make sure that everybody's grateful to you for handing it over. And so, wherever you have terrorism, the first thing you do is conquer territory and you title it. And then the question then becomes, let me go back, how many people are titled outside the law in the world? By nice people, by not so nice people, 5 billion. 5 billion. I am not about a marginal phenomenon. The informal economy is 5 out of 7.3 billion inhabitants. Now, the question is, where is that information, the knowledge? Because the titles are on the backs of cows. They're in pieces of paper floating everything. Well, they're in one place. They are in the ledgers. Let me see if I've got a picture of the ledgers. No, I don't have the picture of the ledgers. No. Yes. Here's the ledgers. How many ledgers are there in Tanzania that are legitimate but are not run by central government? 10,000. Menyekwetis. You want to find out who owns Tanzania? You go to the Menyekwetis. You have ledgers in the Congo. Then you've got ledgers in the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission. What? In the Securities and Exchange Commission? You betcha. When a mining company comes down to the Peru and has to get the area, or an oil company, or a British company, or a Dutch company, whatever it is, it's told by the law, we have communities. We have communities. And they go to the communities, and they say, let me talk to the community chief. He may be a community chief of 1 million people, 20,000 people. And then he says, good, I have a concession for the subsoil, but I have to dig through the topsoil to get to the subsoil. So I want to buy your land. And the community chief is going to say, yes, but you see, I've got a little problem. That's what the law says. But in reality, we have divvied up the property already. People know what they earn, what they own. You mean that pig isn't the pig of the community? No, it's my pig. And how about that house, my house? So somehow or other, in all this sector, what looks like essentially communal property many times is and many times is not. But it's rarely what's in the map. So then, what does the mining company do? Well, it says, all right, what I've got to do with this is I've got to proceed according to the law and the treaties. And what do the treaties say? The treaties say, bilateral investment treaty between Peru and the United States, which we probably even have one with Sweden, it says we shall honor and abide by the laws of the country and its customs. That customs allows you to then creep inside the law and do all sorts of funny things, like go out and sign one by one with each of the owners. So you go in with two types of things, the communal buying and the parcel buying, which is not illegal, it's legitimate, it's just that there's no process for it. Then you go to the United States and say, look, I need 10 billion bucks. So what do we do? He says, oh, well, these titles are kind of funny. So we go through an organization called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and we get them legalized. So in Peru, they're illegal, but in the United States, they're legal. Then you go to the Securities Exchange Commission, and you say, I have complied with Article SEC 10, Securities and Exchange Commission, which allows, on the basis of a recognition of a Peruvian law firm, 3 witnesses, I don't know, whatever it is, in the SEC, that this is true. Mrs. Janet Yellen of the Fed, the Central Reserve Bank of the United States, knows that there's liquidity wanted. She issues $10 billion, and boom, the United States gets capitalized, and the deal gets done. Where are the records? Not in Peru, they're in New York. And if you go to the EEC, you will find the same thing. That's where they are. In other words, there are basically 11 places that are not the official registers where you can find the records of who owns what for 5 billion people of the world. So my knowledge became immensely increased, because I started finding out that the only place I was actually going to find things out was there. And so I started saying, where's the problem? How come we don't do something about it? And then I look at the laws of Peru, the international conventions we signed, the Constitution, and the regulations of every country, and I find out that according to the law, according to the Human Rights Convention, according to everything done by the World Bank, all we Peruvians, all we third worlders actually have the same rights. So what's the problem? The problem is the legal lag. In 1776, the Americans said all Americans have the right to property and have the right understanding that by land, enterprises, machines, animals, whatever it is. But it took until Lincoln came around until they got it. 100 years. That's the legal lag. 100 years for the law to travel. And I still remember as a young boy seeing John F. Kennedy hand the decision or the instructions to a district attorney to go see Governor Wallace in Alabama to tell him that the blacks had the right to their assets. 150 years later, that's how long it takes for law to trickle down. And it's the same thing in Peru. It's the same thing in Afghanistan. So what we found as a system to work, that's where you get the snail, is that what you have to do is short-circuit it. You have to find out from the people themselves what it is they own legitimately, that's been accepted by the Security Exchange Commission, that's been accepted by the EEC and put it into our books. Now, how do you get that information? How do you go about it? Well, we didn't really know until the Shining Path came around. When the Shining Path came around, which you mentioned, Johan, by the way, now let me get to the Shining Path first. The Shining Path, as Johan said, terrorist movement. Pol Pot, the equivalent of that. That was said by the President of the United States, the first Bush. He said it's the equivalent to Pol Pot. Actually, he said the following thing to the US Congress. We have had the most dangerous movements in subversion against the human rights from Germany back in the 1940s. Pol Pot and Abimael Guzman in Peru. 1980 is what you see there at one end of the spectrum, and here you've got 1993. Those are the deaths on the left side. That's the amount of deaths per year, and so you go along the years. The yellow part are the deaths that took place in the countryside, and the blue side is the deaths that took place in Lima. We hardly noticed it in Lima. And the history about the yellow part has not been written. But to make a long story short, we are losing the war by about 1987, and the Rand Corporation of the United States intelligence says Lima will be taken over by 1992, and in Uruguay is created an inter-American force to intervene Peru. And we say, what's the problem? We don't understand. The popularity polls say that the Shining Path doesn't even have 1% popularity. How could they be winning this war? And the reply to that was, well, the farmers are already rebelling. And the farmers have formed, that's the red side there that you said, a resistance, but we can't recognize it. And we can't recognize it because the international community does not recognize a private army. I said, what's the confusion? Well, the Colombians have a private army, it's a paramilitary. I said, wait a second. The paramilitary are a private army at the service of the big landowners. These are small landowners. Why don't we do it? Because the United States will cut us off. And Peruvians are scared of a big power that they only see from a distance. So he said, well, good. What we have to do is sell this to NATO, and we have to sell it to the United States. This is what I've been doing in my spare time instead of writing books. So what we did is we put the story in such a way that we served it. Here I am there in the White House, and we went to the different ministries of the United States and said, let me document you in a language that you will understand. Do you remember your freedom? It started off with the Minutemen. Remember the Minutemen? They were small property holders. Yankee Doodle came to town, and they marched and said, well, these are Minutemen. So what are we going to do now? And once that was done, I signed a treaty with the United States, recognizing that the majority of Peruvians were property holders, and in the best of traditions of Europe and the United States, and that we could go ahead and recognize them. And when we did, that's when the curve starts going down. Simply, there was the overwhelming truth that we were the majority and that they owned their land. And there in that picture that you see on top is everybody getting their title of the farmers. And there you see the ceremony in the government palace where they get their title and they go on a map. And they say, I got my title. I'm going to pass it on through this system of recording. And I would put in a black mark that said, you are now a property holder. And the president of Peru would say, by the way, could you tell me where the Shining Path is with this little red pen? And they put it in. And we won the war in 1 year. 1 year. Many countries have followed what we've said, which is not, I've never pulled the trigger in my life. All I've done is gone out and recognized that when you tell somebody that they have the right that has been recognized by their consensus and not by the Eurocentric consensus that it's got to be according to national law, but that you can pick it up from the bottom up, these guys disappear. They disappear. And that is why I'm telling you that this is about two civilizations. There is one civilization which I proudly am part of, which is the Eurocentric one. Everything that I have in my pocket that identifies me, that allows me to get into Sweden, and they say, "Who are you?" I say, "I'm de Soto. I got a passport." They really? They look at it and say, "Yeah, you don't need Schengen anymore." "No, come on in. I'm really legal." I went to the hotel now, graciously invited, and they said, "What if you have room service charges?" I said, "Well, you know, I've got money in Peru in reserves, and I can pay my bills." They said, "I don't care. Show me your Visa card." I'm absolutely Eurocentric. 5 billion people in the world are not, because you don't know what they own and you don't know who the hell they are. That's the informal economy. 5 billion people. I swear, I counted them. Now, it's not charity business. It's about fundamental structures. It's about Europeans who dominate the world, from those that have the military power and financial power like the United States, to you who have the moral power. You count a lot. And if you don't recognize it, and you simply say, property rights is a right-wing word, we ain't gonna get much further. Are they interested? Every time I put an ad in the paper, in Peru, where I say, all those in this region who are interested in getting their property rights, could we have a meeting? I get never less than 4,000 people. My maximum is 15,000. That's how interested they are. But you know what I do? I don't use the word property rights. The word property rights is a nasty word. Derechos de propiedad. What does that tell you? Nothing. So I closed my books and opened my eyes, and I found there's 140 ways to say property that doesn't have the right-wing notion. And I use those words. And I have identified, and I've got the vocabulary. And what we do is we say, property solves a problem. Intruders, cattle rustlers, the right to water, the right to get your neighbor out, the right to get married with the girl next door and bring those two things together, which they don't have. You address those things, they understand. Now, next picture. By the way, who recognizes that property rights defeated him is the chief of the Shining Path. He's written it in over 70 documents. And nobody reads it because only left-wingers read. Abimael Guzman, if right-wingers did, Johan, you would have given me more credit than that I've been very influential. 340,000, Peru surge, but that's propaganda. Let me go. Then I start discovering something really extraordinary, which is that every time I'm asked to intervene extra-officially, like for example, lately, the guerrillas that fought the Shining Path in Peru, that's December 2016. December, January, February, March, April, 5 months ago, I get 2,000 people at a time. These are the guys, they're armed. And then all of a sudden somebody says, did you realize that in Peru, we've got, out of 30 million that we are, 30 million, 17 million have Facebook accounts. I said, no. And I really don't like Facebook. I don't like sharing my photographs with anybody else. I really don't care about other people. He said, yeah, but think about it this way. Think about it, that the people you want to touch are on Facebook. So then I put my little message there, and I address them in words that they're concerned about, corruption, because their titles are taken away from them. And there they are with their guns, and there they are with their little Facebook accounts, and there they are with a paper. One hit, 2.4 million certified by Facebook Ireland. One. My God, I said, this could change the whole thing. The technology that the West has, and I understand that Sweden is very big into technology, can actually reach the poor people quicker than anything else. Our people barely sometimes write Spanish. But when it comes, yes, no, they're 100 better than I am. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And so technology is actually the way to get to the poor in a language that they understand and with pictures they understand. I don't tell them about titles. What's the title? I put a picture. The Shiny Path title. Oh, we can substitute that. They will understand immediately. And we've also done it with unarmed people. And every time I go, these are illegal miners of Peru. They've got their claims. They're not recognized by government. But they got the claims. They've got the consensus with them. So I put an ad there, 2 million. Now, we've also done it in the Middle East. Now, this is something I can publish because this government didn't hire us. In come the Arab Spring. There's a man that starts off the Arab Spring. His name is Mohammed Bouazizi, who lived in the fair city of Sidi Bouzid, 38,000 population. And he set himself on fire. And you may recall seeing the news that once he set himself on fire, 4 governments toppled. Millions went into the street. Why? I mean, fire and Arab, that hasn't happened really before. So we sent a team, 5 Peruvians, 15 Tunisians. And then we went throughout the Middle East and then said it was because his cart got expropriated. 2 months talking to all the neighbors to find out exactly what the value of the cart was and the fruit. It was about $225. Nobody commits suicide in front of a public. Painful. I mean, we're Christians, like Joan of Arc. I mean, really painful to make a case. What did they take away from him? There's a document. They took away all his assets. They took away his right to mortgage his home, the right to certify that he owns it, the right to form a company because he didn't want to work with his brother who had, as an artist, he wanted a businessman. They took away all his property rights, the right to limited liability, which means that you don't run a business running all the risks at the same time, only that those that you're committed to, they took that. And he wasn't the only one. We actually went out and found out that at the same time he committed suicide, 63 other Arabs did exactly the same thing at the same time, all throughout the Arab countries. And of all the 64, the guys who actually survived were 37. They were extinguished. So what we did is we asked them for interviews, and it's all on film. If you're in the United States, public broadcasting system, and it is called, I forget. Unlikely Heroes. 2 times a night. And all the interviews, and not one mentions Islam, and not one mentions politics. They all say property. Property. And capital. And the word they use for capital, check me out, on film, is Ras el Mel. Now, interesting. Interesting. Where's left and right? Well, in MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, we get 200 front covers because it's painful, but we're onto something. In the West, and I understand that in Sweden, I got 1 article in, we're in page 13, 14, which is okay. But if you're going to fight terrorism, you better think again. Because the issue is the Kasbah against the oligarchy. The issue is those who hold small property rights against the big ones. And no amount of charity you're going to give is going to take that away. Because the only way to understand them and to understand Peru, if you're ever interested, is that we are in your 17th and 18th century fighting the kings and their absolute sovereign right over everything. And once you transport yourself in your time machine, you will understand why property rights is an important issue. Nearly the end. So, what we've done now, and with this I end, is we've started putting together a program, blockchain. We've taken technology you're developing in the West to find out how it is that you cannot take these guys like we do, one at a time. We're too slow. By the time I help a head of state get into property rights, he's dead. His term is over. He hires us at 1 year into government when he's smart, and by the time we're into year 5 and we start, he's out. There's a coup d'etat, he's been assassinated, whatever. We don't finish it. Technology gives you speed. And that's why in this system, which I've left with you, it's in the article that I've given your organization, so you can read about it. We have a way of saying how you use your technology, and you can actually do the following thing, which is the most important thing of all. See what's behind the barbed wire question, the barbed wire? Those are the ledgers where they hold their rights, the lists. And their rights are more than just rights. Around a ledger and a right, and what's in it is a consensus. What makes the law work is the fact that everybody believes in it. If you don't believe in it, it's not going to work. And so the beautiful thing about it is you can use information technology and communications to get to them and actually stop Eurocentric wars between right and left. Is it communal? Is it socialist? Is it right-wing? Is it individual? Is it a cooperative? Ask them. Ask them. And the truth you shall know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Soto, for a most interesting lecture. Now I'm going to welcome up a most qualified panel for a follow-up on your speech, and they are Finance Minister Magdalena Andersson, Professor Magnus Henriksson, Managing Director of the Research Institute of Industrial Economics, Dr. Joachim Appelqvist, Director for International Collaboration and Networks at Vinnova, Swedish Governmental Agency for Innovation Systems, and Mr. Lars Baxell, who, besides being the founder and chairman of Recifarm and also the head of the board for our host, Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum, is the innovative father of the revolutionary product Compede, which I'm sure you all have tried, offering relief to sportspersons and also to people who are not as sportive as myself. So welcome all to the stage. Let's give them a hand. So, ministers first. Ms. Andersson, what is your thoughts after hearing Mr. De Soto's lecture, which point out, I'd say, a world which, to say the least, offers new conditions? What questions arise from a politician's point of view or a governmental point of view?
Thank you for the question, and thank you so much for a very interesting lecture. It was really interesting listening to you. I mean, it's very clear listening to you the importance of legislation, institutions, and administration. And when I was still in academia, this was one of my favorite fields, maybe because it was so clear in the field that politics really matters. And I was thinking a lot about institutional setups and the fact that it really matters what politicians you do have in a country and what kind of institutional setup and the rules and the regulations that they decide. When I entered politics, of course, this was something I was also thinking about this, why do we have the institutions we have in Sweden? Why do we have the legislation and the rules, and how do our administrations work? And why does it work? Because, of course, having a good setup of rules isn't enough. You also have to have citizens comply to them. And compared to many other countries, Swedes are compliant, which is a good thing. Yes, it is. And why are we compliant? And when I think of it, I believe that social trust is very crucial for why we are such a compliant citizens. And social trust is high in Sweden compared to many other countries. And I think it's something that we really should be concerned about to keep up the social trust in Sweden. And I believe that one of the reasons we do have social trust is that we have, compared to many other countries, a fairly equal societies. And I think the fighting increased inequalities is definitely one way of also making sure to keep the social trust that we see. Another thing that I come to think about when listening to you is, of course, how do you change institutions? How do you change rules? How do you change the laws? How do you change administrations? And of course, this is, I mean, in the institutions you have, there is often quite a lot of vested interest. So it's not always that easy to change. And what can politics then do? Well, of course, you need to have courageous politicians. But I also think that if you want to make a long-term change, of course, it's much easier if you can do it in a broader political consensus, because then it's easier to challenge those vested interests. Thank you.
Mr. de Soto, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. I think, Madam Minister, from my point of view, right down south, you really hit the nail on the head. The issue indeed is when you don't have to enforce the law because there's compliance, which means that there's trust and in the system, which means that your system, unless you're racially superior, has got some ways of connecting with people so that the law that the politicians establish actually follows. Now, I don't know Sweden, but let me tell you, if I go to Switzerland, where I grew up, every time that they've got to make a decision that's really great, including the budget, they hold a referendum. Inside the United States, there's not a law that passes without having a comment and notice period. Laws are enacted in such a way that they have a sunset, which is if they don't work, they're taken behind. The Treasury doesn't have a monopoly in the United States for economic policy. That's the Office of Management and Budget that doesn't have functionaries but has politicians checking up on the costs and benefit of the law. If I go to Japan, I find that it's not the same thing like Switzerland, and it's not the same thing like the United States. They've got another system that goes up to expert committees that go back and forth and hold elections locally. So what's interesting about politics is not the elections as much as how people control your decisions. And there isn't one country in the West where it's similar to the other, because if you had standards, you could pass them over. So naturally, what gets us is that every time in Latin America that we elect a dictator, you celebrate him, like Jimmy Carter, just because he's been elected. How did he get elected in the first place? And there's a series of steps. So I plead, simply because I'm from the third world, since your example is so important, it's not that inequality is the end problem. It's that inequality is the source, and it's inequality to assets. And assets you control over if you have property rights. Now, you can decide whether you're going to collectivize them or not, but if the property rights in my country are all run by the oligarchy, how are we going to get the poor inside? So what I'm trying to say is that property is not the end product, it's a starting product. And the only way you can actually find out what consensus there is on property is through the democratic systems that you're talking about. But that means you've got to be able to talk to a whole bunch of people that we're not talking to. Because we third worlders have looked at you and we have understood what it is you like about Western institutions, and you don't get into the details. You look at the broad organizations, and we've got a parliament, and we've got a judiciary, and we've got an executive. We look just like you. But inside, we're not at all like that. We need your interior system.
Professor Henriksson, your research has emphasized and looked on the importance of rule of law and protection of property rights and how both formal and informal institutions impacts the economy. What questions come into your mind after listening to Mr. de Soto?
Yeah, to begin with, this is real scholarship. It's marvelous to listen to you, and I would say that you really understand. You come to the core of what it's all about. Personally, I grew up on a fairly large farm, but we didn't own the farm, and it made all the difference in the world. And I'm happy about that, because otherwise I probably would have been forced for some traditional reason to stay there. but it made all the difference in the world, I can say, even if you couldn't see it on the surface. And then I spent about 2 years of my life traveling on low budgets in countries like Peru and Bolivia, talking to people about these things. And now we see this happening here too. The informal economy is growing very rapidly, and I'm asking the same questions to the person begging outside of my Konsum's co-op store. What would happen if somebody else came over and sat down over there? Not possible, because they own this place. And it's not until now that Swedes understand what's going on. And I'm very, very worried about this, because once it spread, when it came to Sicily a couple of 100 years ago, there's no way they've been able to eradicate it. And as you say, they create their own property rights that are not in any ledgers. They know who owns things. They know who is the person who's allowed to be the beggar outside my co-op grocery store. And I think we are we hope that this wouldn't be the case. Magdalena is talking about trust, but I would say that we have trust because it has been rational to trust the other person. It's not it's not a cultural thing. It's something that you can trust a person because that person will not cheat on you. And there was, when I grew up in the 60s, enormous social control. Everybody knew everything about everybody else. Somebody who misbehaved, that would put a stamp on that person for the rest of his life. Since 20 years I live in a suburb of Stockholm with villas. We don't even say hello to each other anymore. I don't care who moves into the next house. So this social control is gone. And of course, then it's going to be much more difficult to uphold this kind of trust. So, of course, we can explain why we have it, but you also have to realize that it's something that's so valuable that you need to work a lot to retain it. And I don't think we are there yet.
Well, if I may react, absolutely. It goes what Madame Minister was saying, which is the only people who are going to change this are politicians. That's where it's going to happen. It's not going to happen elsewhere. And the thing is to understand that what you have done, I think, in the West is an incredible revolution, but it's only gotten to about 2 billion people. Those 2 billion people include me. I mean, I'm not saying that it's my country that's totally illegal. There's 10, 15, 20% of us that function, according to the Ministry of Labor of Peru, 30% of the people actually function according to the law, but 70% don't. So when I talk about two civilizations, I'm not including myself in the second one. I'm saying that we face another one and that we've got to stop treating it as if it were simply a charity problem. It's essentially a political problem. And what happened is that when communism collapsed in 1989, and all of a sudden the idea that there was an alternative to capitalism in any of its forms, social democratic forms, extreme right forms, Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, whatever you want to, but more or less a system of competition, etc. That moment, there's only one game in town. The Swedish way, the Swiss way, but there's only one game in town. And the question then to ask yourself is, do they have the rights? And to make a difference between property rights and sovereign rights. Because there are many times when actually control over things is done through sovereignty. The argument of kings. Dieu mon droit. And it's not sovereignty, they're just taking it from the other people. So you have to be very clear about that, because what's ahead of you is really a revolution. And the following thing, which is interesting about statistics, which are very important. If you will take the statistics, as you know, I've had an epistolary debate with Piketty. And I agree with Piketty. The place is pretty unequal, but why is it unequal? So he takes International Labor Organization statistics. And he says, look at the salaries that the poor people have. That's Eurocentric. In my part of the world, there's not just laborers and the rich guys. There's a lot in between. And that in between shows that 65% of Egyptians get their wealth not from salaries, but from capital. So if you don't factor that in, you're taking a European mature model of the 21st century and bringing it to us, where everybody is like a cowboy film. Have you seen cowboy films? Clint Eastwood? Yes. All right, he's there, and he has a job once in a while. The rest of the time, he's rustling cattle. His wife is doing spinning cotton. And as Lincoln once said, we're a mixture of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. In his interesting epistolar exchanges with Karl Marx, because Lincoln was president when Karl Marx was very active. And at that time, he said, you know, we're not one, we're not the other, we're somewhere in the middle. When you do that, you cut these guys. So what you're saying applies to the world. And what does it mean in many cases, and with this I end, that when you go to one of these countries and you see that the population is X amount, and then you look at the refugee camps and say, oh, it's a terrible thing, these refugee camps. And they're not in, they're refugees. They're gonna go away. They're not gonna go away. They're gonna stay. And you better ask them what belongs to them, or what you wanna give it to them, or someday it's gonna be too late.
Dr. Appelqvist, you're trying to enhance the level and the systems for innovation. From a more Swedish point of view, now we heard as Magnus talking about the informal economy growing. What is your questions or comments after hearing this?
Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be here today, and it's very interesting to talk about. We're working with important issues on a daily basis, supporting startups and things like that. But I mean, having the opportunity to discuss these fundamental things are very interesting, and it's very important. And it also, since I did my PhD in economic history way back, it really brings me back. But now to my comment. I mean, we really show the importance of formalized property rights for investments in basic assets in the market. But at Vinnova, we're working to stimulate the innovation capacity and have people invest in innovation endeavors. So I would just like to ask you if there are any studies how the presence of a large informal economy affects the incentives of investing in more doing long-term investments of high risk, like in innovation. There is, of course, the literature on IPRs, but I think the studies that I've seen are mainly focused on developed economies and high-tech sectors. So could you elaborate on that? Do you see any, in the studies that you have performed, are there any effects on the innovation capacity with the presence of an informal economy?
Sure. The problem about the advantage of a formal economy is, let me go back a little bit to that, is essentially the magic behind it. Not the magic, the secret sauce is that you're able to capture something intangible, like an idea or relationship. Relationships are not tangible. How can you catch a relationship? When you mention trust, it's intangible, right? Obviously, I have something in my pocket that when I came in through Swedish immigration, they trusted. So what you've learned to do in the West is catch trust in paper on a large scale. That's what you've done, all right? And you've spread it through about 2.3 billion people, and we understand each other, okay? And it's captured there. Like I showed you my Visa card when I go to the hotel. They trusted me immediately. They didn't even look at my eyes. They just went click. Like the taxi driver, I just came in, he just did click. They trusted the document. So in the informal economy, the reason why they're poor is because they can't capture trust, except among small circles. And among small circles, there is no such thing as the possibility to combine on a large scale. Small circles are 300 people, 3,000 people, 1 million people. How many ingredients go into a pencil in the United States actually come from 7 countries at a time. The graphite comes from Sri Lanka. The graphite doesn't work because it doesn't break because you get the wax from Candelia, Mexico. Everybody likes to twirl the pencil in their hands. It's got 6 types of lacquer. Half of them come from Italy, the other half come from Germany. The eraser comes from oil in Saudi Arabia. This is a well-known economic paradigm. that little sliver of metal that keeps the eraser next to the pencil is black nickel from Nigeria, zinc from Peru, copper from Chile. How do you get all of that trust together if it isn't through a document that actually says that you not only trust the guy who gave you the eraser, trust the guy who gave you the wood from wherever it is, from a Swedish forest, trust the other guys, but at the same time, now that you've got the pencil, you got the surplus value. So you captured the surplus value that Marx talked about as well in a property document. And the only way you're going to find out if it's fair or not is that the informal economy, they can do nothing of that. And a property right isn't only about owning things, it's about owning ideas, owning the future of ideas. But as Madame Minister said quite correctly, a property right can be abused. And it can. And actually, former president of the United States, whose name now escapes me, Jefferson, said there is such a thing, and it's a terrible thing. And it is called, I'm looking, what is it called? Not listening to this conference. What is it? Fictitious paper. And Marx picked it up, who was 1 year old at the time, 41 years later, picks it up and said, the problem with capitalism is fictitious paper. Derivatives, for example, fictitious paper. So the problem with property is once you get in it, you have to put the police force inside. And no compliance, you have to enforce it by law. So the reply to all of this is the informal economy will always be zero until you bring in the rule of law and property rights and the politicians to make sure that it is fairly administrated. But more than anything, that you pick up the existing consensus, because what I've tried to talk to you about is that the consensus already exists. 2 million people at a time, it's already there. And the consensus is trust. Now you got to bring them all together, and I'm sure you did that in Sweden in the past. I'm convinced, without knowing Swedish history.
Mr. Baxell, you were taking part as a reference person for the Swedish government official report, Entrepreneurship in the 21st Century. What questions did you come across there that could have an impact on what you've heard from Mr. De Soto today?
That will take hours to go through, but I'll try to concentrate on a couple of them. When I listened to you, I was thinking a little bit about the fact that we in Sweden, we have something like 1.2 million companies, firms in this country. 96% of them are small companies. 800,000 are one-man shows. And the question is, if you set up a system, which we do have in Sweden, which has been developed over decades here, we have a well-functioning checking up system with, of course, property rights is definitely in place. We have all the ledgers, etc. At the same time, there is a peak somewhere when also all these activities, administrative activities, creates a burden on companies. When you look into solving the problem with the property rights, what would be the natural next step for you in developing your systems?
Well, to us, I wasn't expecting that question. Let me get personal. I'm already. All right. Let me get personal. Let me tell you. My problem is that I'm generally, what my sensitivity has grown. I mean, I am a descendant of the conquistadors. And I feel guilty. All right? I just do. Probably my European background. Otherwise, I would have meshed with the rest of my caste. I feel kind of guilty. So all my sentiments about caring for the poor go to the left. But what's the problem with the left? They think the word property rights is a bad idea. All right. Now, I look like property rights, so I go towards the most liberal, and these are the people that understand me. These are the people that understand. But the part that is sort of looking towards the leftist masses is not there. To me, it's quite clear that Afghanistan is one big property right problem. I've seen the Al-Qaeda titles. That's what they're doing. That's what the other guys, you Westerners, should be doing or helping them do. I mean, where ISIS goes, where the Islamic State goes, I've seen them. I've seen the films. It's there. It's quite. I mean, how do you recruit someone unless you go to him and say, I want your mother to have what belongs to her. You're so good. I'd like to recruit you. Oh, you're super good. I'd like to tax you. And I'd like to keep on going. So, to me, the ideal situation is that if you look at what is left, if you want to, for the poor, that's got a constituency. And it's people that have a good heart, but they don't know necessarily how it works. And on the other hand, you've got property rights that know how it works, but forget that they were once poor. So to me, that's why I accentuated technology, because it takes away the whole ideological problem away. If you've got technology and you can reach hundreds of people and you put the format, which is literally, what do you think you own? And don't tell me, show me where you've recorded it. They will come out with the records. A record is a consensus. And what I'm trying to tell you is that I think our big discovery has been to discover that the whole world has actually been staked out. That from Tanzania to Nigeria, I have never come across a place that somebody doesn't have a piece of paper. It's just not Visa. It can be trusted among 1 million people, 500,000. If you can bring that in and remember your 18th and 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution forced you to understand people who were thousands of miles away, or you wouldn't be able to get your pencils together, then I think technology is actually where it goes. So, if you ask me what my wish would be, at this moment, I mentioned the technology, because I read somewhere you were very high on technology, and I told myself, am I going to get a lot of intellectual people around? Maybe. I don't care. But if we can get some people who are close to technology, and you are in Sweden, and just bring in that, then you will not even understand. You have to see what I'm saying. Is you can bring it to bear on these issues, and very profitably so. Because when I showed you the Avatar titles, they're sitting on most of the oil reserves of the world. And if you tell me, no, they're in the States now, forget it. For every hole dug in the United States, 300 holes dug in the States, we've only got one. We've got the resources. If you don't believe me, talk to the Chinese. They're buying us out. So what can you use your technology for is bring it to a profitable end in developing countries. Why? Because the United States is 4% of the world's population. You Europeans are another 4%. Let's toss in a few other, I don't know, I'll give you Japan. Let me give you Singapore. 90%. 90%. And where all the trouble and all the opportunities are. So my dream is getting now, which I didn't think I would live to see it, is technology which can pick up and record and tell us objectively what the hell is going on.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that we have to end here, even though I think we could have gone on for a couple of more hours. Thank you so much for participating in the discussion. So now we are coming to something very special. It's time for the award ceremony for Young Researcher Award. Lars, could you tell us something about this award?
Absolutely. Is it on? Yes, that's right. Actually, I've written it in Sweden, so if you don't mind, I'll try to do it very quickly. Forskning som idag bedrivs kring entreprenörskap och innovation och småföretagsutveckling bidrar med viktiga insikter om det mikroekonomiska fundamentet för ekonomisk tillväxt och industriell dynamik på internationell, nationell och regional nivå. Och för att stimulera unga forskare inom dessa områden delar Entreprenörskapsforum ut det Unga forskarpriset. Priset delas ut årligen sedan 2003 och går till forskare som har utmärkt sig genom sin forskning inom entreprenörskaps- och småföretagsområdet. Priset är på 150 000 kronor, Prisets grundare är Entreprenörskapsforum och donator är Triton Advisors AB. Den som kan komma i fråga för priset ska forska på universitet eller högskola i Sverige, vara under 35 år vid nomineringstillfället och utmärka sig genom sitt akademiska arbete. Vartannat år går priset till en kvinna och respektive en man.
And who is this year's winner?
Nu skulle jag ju ha en sån där och så skulle jag sprätta upp, men det går inte så. Utan jag vänder på bladet, så är det. Entreprenörskapsforum pris till årets unga entreprenörskapsforskare 2017 går till Mikaela Backman, ekonomisk doktor vid Jönköpings internationella business school, JIBS. Var är du?
I announce this, yes?
Och innan ni lämnar över det där så tänkte jag säga några ord om Mikaela så ni vet vem som har varit här idag. Mikaela disputerade 2013 vid JIBS med avhandlingen Region, Human Capital and New Firm Formation. Hon har studerat relationen mellan humankapital och utbildning och dess effekter för individen liksom för företagsproduktivitet. Och idag arbetar Mikaela som universitetslektor på JIBS och fortsätter sin forskargärning kring rollen om humankapital, företagens överlevnad, tillväxt, familjeföretagande och regionala mönster. Det var mycket det där.
Hernando?
Mikaela Backman, PhD. I can't pronounce the name of your university. Jönköping International Business School. Is awarded the 2017 Young Researcher Award. Ms. Backman has produced an excellent dissertation and has subsequently demonstrated good quality and productivity in her research. Her research addresses central strategic and policy-oriented issues for Sweden, for example, the role of human capital, corporate survival and growth, family entrepreneurship, and regional patterns. She has also published in several reputable journals, such as Annals of Regional Science and the Journal of Regional Analysis and Policy. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Mikaela.
Thank you so much.
Could you give us that famous elevator pitch and just tell us briefly what your research is about?
Yes, so I'm a regional economist, which means that I look into location patterns. So I look into different economic phenomena, such as entrepreneurship, how they are distributed across space. I also look into the different characteristics of these locations and how they affect the outcome of firms and individuals. And in my research, I focus on, which has been mentioned, the renewal of firms, industries, and regions. And at the moment, I'm looking into more about older age entrepreneurship, which we see in most developed countries has a lot of large fraction of elder individuals, which cause a lot of social challenges. And one remedy of this problem could be entrepreneurship for this group of people. I also look into how accessibility to banks, so financial capital, how that influences the renewal in terms of new firm formation and innovation in firms. And I look into how that differs between cities and the rural landscape. So that's a short pitch. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum and the Research Institute of Industrial Economics for recognizing my contribution in this field. And of course for Triton Advisors for their generous contribution.
Well, thank you so much. And we are going to have to keep an eye on what's coming from your research. It will be very interesting to follow. Once again, warm congratulations. So this will end the program on the stage, and thank you so much for sharing this occasion with us. After this intense short session now stuffed with intellectual food thoughts, we are going to attend a reception out here where we will have possibility to talk to each other. And I will also ask those of you who have attended on stage to just remain for a few minutes for a short photo op. But thank you so much for this afternoon, and we'll see each other out there. Thank you.